the actions taken or necessary for implementing electronic inspection authorized by this subsection, including personnel and other resources utilized to support electronic inspection, how the brand committee's information technology capabilities are utilized to support electronic inspection, the listing of approved non-visual identifiers, the requirements for enrolling cattle identified by approved non-visual identifiers, current and anticipated utilization of electronic inspection by the livestock industry, and the fees required to cover or recover cost of performing electronic inspections. Welcome, Mr. Widows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is John Widowson, JOHN, Thank you, Mr. Chairman and fellow senators, for having the Nebraska Brand Committee here today to update you on the progress of the e-inspection project in LB 572. Good afternoon, Senator. I would like to just maybe back up just a second and give you a little bit more update on a few other things in 572 so you just know the progress of that. On September 1 in 572, we had a 48-hour notice. On September 1, that was implemented within the agency. That has been very successful and has been a huge benefit to our staff, and the producers seem to have grasped that 48-hour notice fairly well. Going to October 1st, we did implement the fee reduction on inspection from $1 to 85 cents. So that was implemented on October 1st. On November 1st, we implemented the waivable citation for all those violations. So that was implemented on November 1st. And the committee has just decided, and we will have an implementation day of January 1 of 2022 for the new brand research fee of $50. So that kind of gives you an update of certain items that were in 572, the timelines of when they were implemented, and how that progress is going. Obviously, in 572, we have the ability for e-inspection, and that's the primary reason that we are here today. We also had in 572 the mileage of converting our surcharge fee to mileage. At this point in time, we're still working on all of the equation for that, and the committee's thought process is to pair that with the inspection process, or maybe a little bit before that. So that's where we're at on the mileage, to kind of work those things hand in hand. Today we have 3 committee members with us, and we also have our IT coordinator with us. And so we will kind of tag team on some questions and answers for you guys, and also a little bit of report. We all have different roles and strengths on the e-inspection. So at this point in time, you've gotten our report. I don't want to go word for word and read it to you. I don't think that's what we're here for. We are in a process. As a committee, we decided that it was very, very critical and very important to have producer input. And so the committee instructed me and Dana Schwenk, our IT coordinator, to coordinate and develop a group of producers that would give us some insight. And so we have formulated the e-inspection subcommittee. That's a group of 10 individual producers. They represent themselves and their operations that they're associated with. As of today, we've had 2 of those subcommittee meetings. And basically what these producers are doing are just giving us their feedback, their understanding of how EIDs and potentially the use of e-inspection could affect their operations or the segment of the industry that they represent. From that perspective, we have people representing the dairies. We have multiple of the 10, multiple that are representing the cow-calf sector, the feedlot sector. We have a veterinarian on that. We have the auction markets on there. So our goal as a committee and staff was that this e-inspection is a very major, important part of what we're going to have happen to our agency. And we felt like it was very important to have the stakeholders that are going to be involved in this to have a definite hand in developing and telling us what they want from the product and how it should work. I will probably at this point in time pass on to Dana Schwenk or Dwayne, whoever wants to come up and touch base a little bit more on that. if you would have any more questions for me at this time. Dan is probably going to go through the process of the steps a little bit more in depth of where we are. She's more of the expert on the IT side. So are there any questions for me?
Any questions at this point? And we can always bring you back. You'll sit close to the front after everybody else had a chance to testify or make a presentation, and then we can ask questions and direct them to whoever most pertinent to answer them. Okay, fine. Any questions now, though? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Good afternoon, Senator Halloran, members of the committee. My name is Dwayne Gangwish. It's DuaneGangwish. I live in Lexington, Nebraska, and currently work for Dar Feedlot. I'm also a member of the brand committee recently appointed by Governor Ricketts here in late in 2021. I have been asked to be the committee member leading the charge on the e-inspection process. As John has said, we've had 2 meetings so far, and he's kind of described the makeup of that subcommittee. I'll elaborate just a little bit. The members of the subcommittee bring a pretty diverse personal experience, some of them many decades long, some of them generations. One of our members is a dairy producer. They have 7 dairies that own Oshkosh Feed Yard. Those 7 dairies are located in Wisconsin. They bring 2- and 3-day-old calves from Wisconsin to Kansas on a health paper. Then they move from Kansas to Nebraska on a health paper. They're developed at the Oshkosh facility, potentially bred there, and then move back to Wisconsin on a brand inspection in and out. And there's no change of ownership. These are slick-hided cattle, and they're all Holsteins, so they tend to look a bit alike. So we consider that as a low-hanging fruit. Another member of our committee is a cow-calf rancher from Cherry County who owns his cattle from ranch to rail. He owns them all the way to harvest and has used EIDs in his management facilities for several decades. Those are kind of the 2 extremes. But as John alluded, we brought this group together to bring their personal experience of both successes and failures of using these technologies. LB 572 specifically addresses non-visual identifiers. Today we have a lot of maybe innuendo, maybe a misunderstanding, maybe lack of knowledge that all surrounds a little electronic EID, and that is not the case. We are trying to craft methods and procedures that will be effective regardless of the platform regardless of the type of non-visual identifiers. There are some that are specifically illuminated in 572, but there are many today that we don't know. I'm familiar with an organization that is currently working on facial recognition for cattle. We know that exists in our society, in our world today, used on people, but the same principle is the case, and they're wanting to include that in a blockchain format from birth to harvest. So that is a technology, again, we could say it's a visual because it's facial recognition, but in any case, how might the policies, procedures, and methods within the brand committee, and specifically e-inspection, adapt to new such technologies? So the process that we're at this point is trying to gather information, gather understanding of how these may impact the different segments of our industry, both the traditional cow-calf ranch and the sandfills in Nebraska. Yes, feedlots, even harvest facilities eventually. The committee has focused our intent with the use of the e-inspection initially to be in non-change of ownership types of inspections. We want to learn to crawl before we walk and learn to walk before we run. So eventually it is our intent, and our intent from the beginning, to have inspection for the change of ownership. But prior to that, we want to make sure that we work out the bugs, work out the issues that are a part of that process for non-change of ownership. So that is the makeup, kind of a broad makeup of the committee. It's wide and varied. We're gathering, as I said, information on the successes and failures. I personally have been involved in probably 300,000 plus EID transactions in my career, both at Dar Feedlot and prior to that, working for Verified Beef, which was the second largest PVP company in the US. So those are having to verify the characteristics of cattle all the way from birth to harvest. And that is all done with, in that case, it is done with an EID, possibly the little round ones or a different type of tag. So I've survived several USDA audits in that process, but broad experience with that. That's kind of an update of that makeup of that committee and what our focus and what our intents are. I will tell you that based on the first two meetings that we've had, I fully expect that this process will take 18 months to 2 years before that subcommittee brings back recommendations or ideas to the 5 brand committee members for consideration. So my caution to both producers and to others is be patient. We want to make this be right. We want it to work for everyone. And we've only just begun the process of working on this endeavor. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I think I might have one.
Yes, Senator Gregory.
Just clarifying for me, thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The brand committee, the primary responsibility of the brand committee is ownership, right? I mean, that's your whole mission is who, that individual owns those cattle that he's about ready to sell.
The statutory responsibility for the brand committee is to enforce the statute, sir. A part of that is identifying ownership. A hot iron brand or a freeze brand, which are prima facie evidence of ownership, much like the title to your car. Once I have that, that is a title to my animal. Also, as part of the responsibilities of the brand committee, if I move those cattle from this location to another location, I still own them. Say I move them to summer grazing, or if I'm in the Sandhills and I move them to the Platte Valley or somewhere else for corn stock grazing, that's a non-change of ownership transaction. So that's a part of the responsibility of the brand committee as well.
So just basically boils down to ownership.
Yes.
With the EID then, and what will the cost be for software? You're not going to go above or get more technical about what you're tracking with this new EID and computer, are you?
I think Ms. Schwenk will be more versed to answer that specific question, but in general, the technology and the software, et cetera, that is used in the industry today, per se, I read every EID that arrives at the feed yard and every EID that leaves the feed yard. And that's those technologies and those costs and that software is already present throughout the industry. There may not be on some operations, they may not have that technology or software at this point, but the cost of entry is rather insignificant.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Brown.
Thank you, Chairman Howard, and thank you, Mr. Gangwish, for your testimony. So at the Dar feed yard where you've used the EID for a long time, what % of the cattle typically will lose that button? They get it snagged in a fence or a panel or something like that?
It's an excellent question and it varies, but I'll give you specific examples. Generally inbound cattle, we feed cattle for, Dar is a commercial feedlot, so we don't I personally own cattle at the feed yard, but the company itself may only own a couple hundred. So, but we feed cattle for one particular customer, about 35 to 40,000 head per year. As those cattle arrive at our facility, they all have to have an EID prior to arriving. So at some point they've been in the NA system, and it's in the neighborhood of 0.5% or less that will arrive without, that are torn out or have fallen out or have in some way been removed. So that's, and on outbound cattle, we've had situations, we had a particular packer call us and tell us that only a third of the EIDs were reading. And it was later discovered that they had a software issue. The tags were present. Industry standards that are the ISO standards for the manufacturers require that they have less than a 2% failure rate or less than 2% fallout.
So then what's your standard procedure? You've got a pen of 100 cattle and a couple lost their EIDs. Do you just enter those as no EID because they won't have a hot iron or a freeze brand on them?
They may or may not have a brand on them depending on our customer and where they come from. And if they come from a western state, they will have a brand on them. If they come from an eastern state, they may or may not, mostly not. In every one of the PVP programs where they are identifying those animals for export, whether it's to Europe, to Asia, or to some other location, those all require specific characteristics to follow those animals. And all a USDA AMS oversees all of that. All of those programs require, if you have a lost EID, they require a secondary identifier. So I spoke of the one customer that we feed 35 to 40,000 head. Those animals all have a secondary identifier, and those are identified prior to our arrival. And if they're not prior to our arrival at our location, we record them. So if an EID were to be torn out or lost, we can replace it as long as we have a secondary identifier. So that's the case in a feeding operation, how we handle that particular situation.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Ganglish, when was the last, what was the date of the last committee or subcommittee meeting that you had?
I believe it was November 19th. December 17th hasn't come yet.
I don't know about other members of the committee, but I'm guessing they've gotten a lot of emails and phone calls on the question about it being not open to the public and to the press. So I'd like to ask you to address why that was the case. I think if you noticed, and I made a special emphasis of it when I opened this meeting, that it was a public briefing, open to the public, invited testimony only, but it was open to the public. Mm-hmm. And clearly the reason we do that here is because everything we do here is very dependent upon trust of the public, right? And transparency builds that trust. And whether or not there's anything going on that's underhanded or not doesn't matter. The perception becomes reality sometimes, right? And so to me, it's so important that everything is done to the public, press invited. And I mentioned this to Mr. Sawyer previously, that, when you have the press there, I invite the press. The press is at every committee hearing that we have here. And when we go into executive session, granted, the public's not allowed in there because we're talking about the bills and talking about forwarding those to the floor, but the press is always there. And what we direct the press, we give them some direction on that. We ask them not to quote anyone of the committee members. If they want to quote them, they need to ask them personally if they can quote them. But that being said, I wish you would address why it was chosen not to have this open to the public.
Thank you, Senator Allen, for the question, and I will address it very directly. 84-1409-1B specifically allows subcommittees, working groups, or smaller groups of a state agency to have discussions to gather information. And it was chosen to do this subcommittee specifically in a environment where there was a freedom to share information, successes and failures. And not everybody wants to confess their failures openly and widely to the public. There's also been some privileged business information that has been shared within these subcommittees, that it was felt that it was better to allow that kind of conversation open and wide without it being publicly printed, publicly shared. When I say privileged business information, I mean the number of head of cattle on feed, the number of who the customers were, what their particular business transaction types, methods, locations were, and how those successes and failures of using EIDs might impact their business or impact their customers' business. That is the why. And the subcommittee is made up of a very broad spectrum of stakeholders within the industry. And so therefore there's nothing to hide. The intent of having a wide group of people is bring broad information, broad perspective. And as I said a few moments ago, we fully expect this to be a 1 to 2 year process to try and bring this back to the full committee for consideration. So the intent of the subcommittee is, I'm being redundant, but gather information, gather ideas, discuss successes and failures before it would ever bring a recommendation or a suggestion back to the official brand committee for initial consideration.
Senator Carney.
I'm still trying to grasp how the inspection has anything to do with the brand committee's mission. It seems like it's an inventory control between the buyer and the seller and a consumer who wants the inspection. So I'm looking at it being a brand inspector. 1,000 heads show up at the packing plant or shipped. You said 2% failure, so 20 of them don't have a. Should the brand inspector think those were stolen? Because there's no identification, the tag or whatever is gone. How does this prove ownership when you have a failure rate of a little tag that could be removed by anybody? I could go into your lot and take one, load it up, take it home, clip the tag off. So how does this help the main mission of the brand?
I think the best way to answer your question for myself, there may be others behind me that would answer that possibly differently. The brand committee today is also required to identify slick cattle, to brand inspect slick cattle. For the benefit of the committee, slick cattle is those that carry no brand. There's no permanent physical
I understand that. Mine are not branded.
Correct.
So if you got a tag in the ear and that tag disappears, there's a slick cow.
Yes, sir.
But you told the packing plant these were all owned by you and they all had, your customer and had a tag in it. So 2% of them don't have the tag. So therefore, how are you to prove that those are yours? Because your identification isn't there. You don't have a brand.
Correct. As I have mentioned earlier, what our intentions are to begin with a non-change of ownership and prove up on that first. I agree with you that if a tag can be removed, if it's an 840 tag, if the first 3 numbers of that tag are 840, that is a USDA tag and it says right on it, unlawful to remove. That's a federal offense.
It's unlawful to steal a steer, period.
Well,
I don't think they worry about removing the tag.
I believe it's unlawful to steal anything.
Yeah.
However, that still happens. Your specific example is cattle going to a packing plant.
From your lot for a
From our
certain
lot.
customer.
Yes.
I'm assuming what you like this about this, it's inventory control. You can just, cattle could mingle, two lots could get together, you can separate them easily with their electronic scan of which one belongs to who.
That is precisely true, and I do that every single day, Senator. Specifically yesterday, we had one heifer come in with a group of 800 steers. We saw that it was a heifer. We put it into another group. The paper trail didn't, internally, the paper trail didn't follow that one animal. We scanned those animals. I saw that that was from one animal in that pen from a particular ranch, and all of its cohorts were in another pen. So to your point, can it be used as an inventory mechanism? Yes, at our feedlot, we use it as an as an inventory tool. We also use it as an animal health tool. I can tell you which animal has been received which medication, when it was sick, what day it was sick, did it recover, did it die?
How did you do that? You update that tag all the time, the information on it?
We attach information to that EID internally in our software, in our business.
So all your scanning is the ID and then it relates back to the.
But there are two other identifiers that we also use in case that one is missing. We can identify that animal specific to a harvest facility. We have to ensure that there are no drug residue withdrawals. Antibiotics of different kinds have a different withdrawal period, and we have to prove that every time that we ship cattle.
So in the future, could a rancher have this EID and he could just run a drone and check his inventory? Can the EID be scanned remotely?
Depending on the type of technology, the low frequency tags have a read distance of 18 to 24 inches. We have alleys that are just wide enough for cattle, and we put two antennas, one on each side, and so that we're assured they're reading properly. I could not read one of those types of tags at a distance of 3 feet. So to answer your question directly about a drone, no. If the technology being used was high frequency, that read distance is approximately 20 to 30 meters. And I do use that type of technology at our facility for in our harvest situation. I put a UHF tag in a silage truck or a high moisture truck. When it comes across the scale, I can read that tag. It's just a number, but it's associated with a producer and a commodity and a price and et cetera. So if the technology was high frequency, could it be read with a drone? I would have to say yes, but again, the distance of 20 to 30 meters. So at that point, you're going to create a significant amount of excitement on the
One
ground.
question. When was the last time the brand office recovered stolen beef from your package, from your yard, or helped you identify loss?
I have only worked there it'll be 4 years in April. Never.
You never turned one in, that you had something?
We had one lost and they did recover it.
Who did?
The brand committee, the brand office notified us. We unloaded some cattle late at night. The gate got left open. About 20 or so black cattle meandered by the night watchman. We fetched some of them out of the irrigation canal, some out of some cornfields, but we couldn't find one. And about 2.5 months later, somebody brought a steer in that was not branded, brought a steer into the Lexington sale barn. The brand inspector started making phone calls. They were able to read the EID, and that EID tag matched our tag manifest. And so they returned the animal to us.
There's one example where the EID
Yes.
card came into effect. All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay,
It
Senator.
wasn't, your question was stolen. I apologize. I
No.
was
No, you.
parsing words.
It got lost.
It went on a walkabout.
Senator Brewer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks.
All right, here's the dilemma that we're in. From the time that most of us came into this body, there's been a push to just collapse and do away with the brand committee. So when you guys have, and I understand that you claim that there's nothing to hide, and that can be perfectly true. But what we live with is perception. And I don't think you could have done anything to cause more of an uproar amongst those who are absolutely convinced that those sitting on the brand commission right now have one purpose in life, to do away with that iron brand and to come up with these e-tags that are going to be the miracle to all the future for cattle. And that's exactly what they think happened in this meeting. Now, I'm pretty sure that's not what happened in that meeting. But unfortunately, perception is reality, and that's the reality we're dealing with. So as much as you'd like to keep quiet, whatever you want to talk about, or prevent someone from having to speak openly about things that they don't feel comfortable with, you have more of these secret meetings, and I guarantee we're going to be answering more questions here about why you want to do that when we get beat up here every time we try and do anything that's perceived to be not transparent. And so just, understand that that makes it hard to answer, because at the point, and maybe this is the question I need to ask you, is the end state for all the research and all the work that's being done on EID to change from the hot iron or freeze brand being the way to recognize ownership of cattle? No. Okay, that's good. That helps us to hold at bay those who think that indirectly that is the end goal of all this. But, that's the mail that we have to answer that, is awkward, because you don't have an answer on why the meeting had to be, not only not open to the public, but to the press also. So I guess that's what I just wanted to share with you, is that it puts us in a position where we don't have answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I would, you didn't ask me a question, if I could elaborate. It was me who asked the press to leave.
Okay.
It was me. It was not some other person. It was me. I was familiar with the statute. I was familiar with the case law that is supporting the statute. And I was also familiar with the task at hand assigned by the LB 572 to develop these processes. To your point about being secret, we had a open meeting December 1st that was public notice, that was available for anyone and everyone. We had an agenda item specific to public comment on the e-inspection subcommittee. We opened the meeting to that session of the portion of the agenda, and it was silence. There was not one voice that was raised. There was not one question. The next day, Mr. Whittison and Mr. Sawyer were invited to the Nebraska Cattlemen's Convention, to the Brand and Property Rights Committee, to give an update. They gave an update about the e-inspection, about the other items that required and enabled by 572, and was opened up to questions. There was not a single question or comment about e-inspection. So to those of you who have the opportunity to receive fan mail and phone calls, I would return to them and say, this is going to be a long process. There are no secrets. There are no issues to be held in secret. It is a matter of finding ways to use technology to assist the brand committee in enforcing the statutes of the state. Just as with hot iron or freeze brands, which are voluntary, so will be e-inspections voluntary. So they are welcome to use them. They're welcome to not use them. I personally own a brand. I do brand my cattle. They are in the brand inspection area. I could choose not to. That is my privilege. So I would encourage each of you, as you receive those questions and those concerns, to state the facts there are no secrets, and no one, other than a couple of individuals, have raised their hand in concern.
Okay, and just as a follow-up to that, then, do you anticipate any time in the future having any more meetings that are not open to the public or to the press?
I anticipate that for the remainder of the E-inspection subcommittee, the life of that subcommittee, that they will not be open meetings.
They will not be open meetings?
They will not be open meetings.
All righty.
Senator Barone?
I was at a friend's feed yard the other day, and I asked him, what does the brand inspector, how did they inspect your feed yard? He said, well, I got to fill out this little form every time when a load comes in, a load goes out. Little sheet. You know what I'm talking about? You do that?
He was incorrect, sir.
All right. Explain to me what you do.
If he was not a registered feed
He's a
yard,
registered.
he is a registered feed yard. Upon arrival, those animals have to either arrive, if they come from a non-brand state, they have to arrive on a health paper.
Yeah, I help.
But they do have to be brand inspected in,
All right.
okay? That is done by a brand inspector during daylight hours with a 48-hour
Understand.
notice, et cetera, et cetera. Because he's a registered feed lot, he is able under the statute to ship cattle to harvest, direct to harvest, without inspection. And yes, he fills out a form that is quadruplicate. And one copy goes with the cattle to the harvest facility. 2 copies go with to the harvest facility. One is retained on site and one is submitted to the brand committee.
Got a whole
stating-
stack of them. All right.
Yeah, I got boxes of them, sir.
All right. And the brand committee, or not the committee, but the brand inspection people, they come out and look at those?
Quarterly, we have a staff person from the brand committee comes to our facility. We have a paper file, we have many filing cabinets. They pull those at random and they look for the proper documentation. And that's done quarterly.
All right. So that's 1890, and now you're looking at 2020 with the E thing. Are you trying to eliminate that? What's the reasoning? As
Well-
far as, I'm talking about the brand committee, not
Yes.
about your inventory, of what's handy for you, managing your inventory or sales. Are you going to get rid of, is the plan to get rid of those forms that that the brand committee can just rely on that E-verified, whatever you want to call it, E-cattle-fied? Right now, the statute says they have to fill out those forms. You do, all right? That's how they keep track of your,
I don't believe the statute says that, but that is in the rules and regulations that they
all
have.
right, rules and regulations.
Yes, sir.
So we already have a system in place.
Yes.
Why do we need this E?
Those cattle are not brand inspected when they leave our feed yard. That is merely a notification to the brand committee that many animals left on this day and time, and this is where they went to. Those animals are then brand inspected at the harvest facility. Depending on the state, if we ship cattle to, and we do this the other night, we shipped 39 loads to Creekstone. That's at Arkansas City, Kansas, southeast of Wichita. We fill out the paperwork. Those cattle are all branded. We fill out the paperwork that many cattle left, but Kansas is not an inspection state. So they were not, by statute, we are allowed to ship those cattle on our brand permit. And we fill out the paperwork and provide
Right,
that.
so this E, what is it? I'm talking about as a legislator and a government entity, the brand committee. As far as Senator Gregor said, it's ownership. How does this fit into it? We already have this form system over here where we fill out the forms, and we have the health certificates from out of state, and they check it. You had the double check make sure the packing facility got one of the forms from the feedlot. Why am I here with this E? We already have a system. Are you saying this system is inferior that we have now in this new one? That we'll use this new electronic to replace that? I'm trying to figure where we're going with this.
We are being asked by our clientele, producers in the state of Nebraska, to be able to use this technology. And LB 572 allows for non-visual identifiers to be used. Our task at hand as a committee, and specific to this subcommittee, is to figure out the how, where, why, when, not the why, but how, where, when, and if. So there has to be methods and procedures to affect the use of these technologies. It might be a DNA sample. It might be a retinal scan. It might be a nose print. In cattle, a nose print is like your fingerprints. Or it might be facial recognition. I think there's a lot of concern going on that this is going to change everything. Let me say once and for all, emphatically, and you will hear Mr. Whittison say this repeatedly, there is no intent, desire, nefarious or otherwise, to do away with hot iron brands or freeze brands. This is merely a voluntary program that could be used, and we need to figure out the how can it be used so that it supports the statutory responsibility.
Your feed yard, how would it help your feed?
It won't.
You still plan on filling out those pieces of paper for every load?
I'm required to do that by law.
And you're doing this for commercial reasons, for business reasons, using the tag, identifying your clients' like inventory.
Not inventory, sir. We use it for disease tracking, for carcass data, for performance data. We use
All
that
right, so I'm your
internally.
customer and I'm bringing in 10,000 head every month to you to feed, taking it into my shelves. You don't use it to help that client keep track of his 10,000 head?
In this particular case, that client keeps track of them themselves.
How?
They have an API into our database and they can know when we moved an animal to another pen. So that is a very advanced circumstance. They will call me and say, this animal's in a different pen. When did you move that?
And
I have to
it
justify
all started with that tag.
Didn't start with that. They developed that system in the last year and a half. These tags have been around for 20 years.
But how do they know it moved? Because you physically entered, one of your staff physically entered, we moved this cow over here,
Not a cow, sir. It was
steer.
or heifer. We use them in a business sense, different than what the e-inspection program is being is being evaluated to use. We're trying to be able to say, if Senator Gregor wanted to move his calves from his place to summer grazing, today that would have to be done with a physical inspection. If the e-inspection program is brought to fruition, Senator Gregor enrolled his cattle. At this point, we don't even know the procedures and process to do that. But once we identify how to do that, Senator Gregor could provide a tag manifest saying his cattle are going over here for summer grazing. And it would not require a physical inspection. Then they're going to move back, okay? But we have these animals identified. In the dairy industry, they put an EID tag in that at birth, and they know its genetics, they know its mother's milk production, its granddam's milk production. Everything is tracked by that number. There's not data on the tag, it's just tracked by that number. We're merely trying to devise a system, voluntary system, that could be used within the statutory authority of the brand committee to do electronic movements, inspections rather than physical inspections. Inventory? No. Today, the brand committee does not keep track of any kind of inventory. They know that they inspected 50 head for Senator Kavanaugh, but they don't know how many cows he has. Wouldn't have to be too bright with math,
But you use it as a free market for your inventory.
in our business at Dar Feedlot, we use it for a multitude of reasons.
Part of it is you can keep track of the inventory and how many shots it's had, where it's been.
We don't depend on the EIDs for inventory. We depend on people to go count.
Okay, I'm not considering that. The brand committee is gonna use it for inventory. You use it for commercial reasons, and what you said earlier made a little bit of sense now. You already are using it
Yes,
for commercial reasons, and maybe it could help
yes.
the brand committee use it to identify ownership.
It could.
That's the only reason the brand committee exists, that Senator Gregor started to question it. All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, Senator Groney. Senator.
Thank you. Just real quick question. As far as brand and brand committees, what kind of cattle theft have you had in the last 5 years? Did you tell me that you could go just steady or just only EID? And what, I'd like to follow, if you know, what kind of, has there been a tremendous amount of theft, or what level of theft have you?
Senator, we have 6-foot welded steel fences around our feed yard. To my knowledge, in the last 4 years, we've not had any cattle stolen. We've had some cattle get out, one killed on the road by a vehicle. Cattle go on a walkabout within the feed yard, but we have not had any stolen as Dark Beavot as a company. That's not the case out in the open, wild and woolly places of Nebraska. There are nefarious people that the most common number of cattle stolen are those that'll fit on a trailer. It's generally not the onesies and twosies. It's in terms of theft. Sir.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator Gregor. Any other questions? With that, I would have to say, I would encourage you, with your answer to Senator Brewer's question about with further questions of this subcommittee meeting, not open to the public. I would thoroughly encourage you to think otherwise on that. Even though you're within the scope of the law, probably, very likely, on the open meetings law, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You got to build what you're building on trust. You got trust. You don't have trust. If you don't have trust, you have none. So I would encourage you to have open meetings. There's nothing that proprietary. I'm sorry, if it's that important that people don't talk about who they do business with, then they shouldn't talk about it. That's fine. That's their business not to say that publicly. But the people need to know what your plans are, what the input is to that subcommittee, and how that's going to direct to the brand committee on what to do. Let's take that another step. Let's just say when your subcommittee is done aggregating all the information that you're gathering to report back to your committee, I assume, and they assume, that you're going to be open and transparent about everything you heard.
Absolutely.
So if the same kind of respect needs to be given to the public with the subcommittee. That's just my encouragement. You can choose to do what you want to do, but I'm going to suggest that if there's more closed meetings, there may be a senator that may wish to sponsor legislation to do away with this program completely. I'm just, because I've heard wind of that. I'm not going to offer that. I'm not going to sponsor that, but I think there may be someone that would do that. And that's not a threat, but that's just, it is what it is. But I appreciate your testimony and your feedback. You got experience, and that's what we wanted to hear from you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Okay. Who's next?
Chairman, if I could just maybe follow up on a question that was asked from Senator Groney to Mr. Gangwish. At the end of the day, it's not our responsibility to provide evidence of ownership for cattle. That is the producer. So if 10,000 head was taken to a packing house, and in his example, 2% lost the ear tags, there would be 20 head that didn't have their evidence of ownership. The brand inspectors would hold those 20 head and wait until that producer provided evidence of ownership to release those cattle. And that's the same scenario that we deal with today with hot irons. So you have 10,000 head and you say, these are all my cattle. They should all have this brand on their left hip. And if there's 20 head that don't have that brand on their left hip, those 20 cattle are going to be sitting here with a hold until the brand inspector is pacified that he has the current and the proper evidence of ownership. So the standard of whether it's an E-inspection, a physical inspection, whether you're using hot iron, freeze brand, EID, the standards of evidence of ownership are still going to be the same. And one thing that I would like to reiterate before Dana gets up and goes through a little bit of the process with where we're at. Everything that we are working on in this E-inspection starts with our investigative team, making sure that our processes, our regulations, and how this will be handled will stand up in a court of law. At the end of the day, that's the judge and jury, no pun intended. So we have to build regulations, policies, standards, procedures that if something goes wrong, and the EID is the use of evidence of ownership, that our investigators will be able to take Senator Greger's cattle to a court of law and prove that his cattle were stolen to get your funds back. And so there's a lot of things that are in this subcommittee when we talk about this is what we need to do, this is what we need to do, this is how this will work. And our investigators say, that ain't gonna work, that ain't gonna hold up. The judge will throw that out. That's not good evidence. And so I just want you to know that is the backstop, that we will have to have enough evidence trail, good enough evidence to hold up just like a hot iron or a freeze brand. There is no intent, no desire of anybody on staff from the Nebraska Brand Committee or the committee to eliminate, to remove, to not provide the service of hot iron and freeze branding. We encourage it. 40 to 50% of our cattle that we inspect have no brand on them. That makes our job that much tougher when we go try to stand up for you and say, your cattle were stolen, they were lost, these are your cattle. We have nothing to go off on those cattle. We promote the use of hot iron and freeze brands, but it's voluntary. That's not our role. That's not our job to tell producers what to use and not to use, just like the EID. EIDs and E-inspection will only work for certain situations. And in the RFL situation, where those cattle have to be inspected into an RFL, that way they don't have to be inspected going out. Okay, we've just moved the inspection to the front versus the back end. But if those cattle have been inspected into an RFL, let's just use the DAR example, and they want to let those cattle out into a wheat pasture or cornfield that is 200 yards from their feed yard. They've now broke the regulation or the rules of the RFL permit. Those cattle have to be inspected back into their feed yard. In that situation where those cattle already have EIDs, they've already been enrolled into the Nebraska Brand Committee's database, they can give us a manifest saying, these 200 head that we turned out October 1, we want to bring those 200 head back in December 1. That saves a physical inspection, somebody going out there, man, labor, all those things. But that criteria, the processes and all those things, we were going to be comfortable and confident that it holds the same standard of a physical inspection. So I just want to clear up that question.
Yeah, appreciate that. Senator Greger?
Thank you, Chairman Holman, and thank you, but, so those 20 head, let's stay with that scenario, those 20 head, they have no brand on them, and the ear tags are gone. How is the producer gonna come in and say, yeah, those are my, how would he ever prove that to your satisfaction, or who's ever out there satisfaction that, yeah, those 20 head are his? How do you do that?
Great question. It would be the same practices that we do when they come in with no brand or no EIDs. You have to have other forms of evidence of ownership, whether it's a bill of sale, health certificate, all the other things, a shipping affidavit. Those are the other forms of evidence of ownership that you are going to have to prove that you own those cattle. It's the responsibility of that producer to prove to us to a level of comfort that you own those cattle.
I think to Senator Greger's point, those cattle don't have a bill of sale on them when they're out wandering around, right? So how do you connect that to the owner when the owner says that's my steer?
Yep. And that's where our staff is trained. That's where there are You bought these from the seller and the buyer. You have in your possession a bill of sale that you've bought in 200 head of steers.
You could have
Black steers.
bought 5,000 head and you only got 1,000 here.
That is correct.
That, are they within the, the group that you bought on that bill of sale? Are those the same cattle?
That's why we encourage hot iron and freeze branding.
Yeah, okay.
And that's why we would encourage people that don't use hot iron or freeze branding for whatever reason, we're giving them another option of using EIDs.
Thanks.
I've been so encouraged by the hot brand effort. I've had Mr. Leonard look into a hot brand for the Ag Committee. And Rocking A is taken already, so we've got to work on something else for that.
Well, I actually know somebody that might be able to help you with that. So
Okay.
if you need any more assistance, let me know.
All right. Well, let's, I appreciate that. Let's move on to Nana Schwank. Good afternoon.
Hi, how are you guys?
Good.
Dana Schwenk, DANNA-SCHWENK. I am the IT coordinator and project manager for the Nebraska Brand Committee. I thought I was just going to be answering questions at John and Dwayne's side. I didn't realize I had to actually speak, so I apologize. I don't really have anything super prepared. I want to just reiterate what John just touched on, that almost 50% of the livestock that our brand inspectors have to inspect are slick-hided cattle. And we have a lot of producers, while they believe in brand, they just don't utilize them because of the type of cattle that they own, dairy cattle, for instance. So we do believe, as Dwayne said, that there is some low-hanging fruit with this operation. And those are the producers that we have had repeated problems with over the years with our inspection time. The dairy cattle coming in from Wisconsin, and they're never changing ownership. They just are tagged in Wisconsin. They come in, they grow up in Colorado or in Nebraska, and then they go back to Wisconsin. However, one truckload constitutes 40 inspections. So we end up with 40 cows going back home, 40 different owners, which requires 40 different inspections, which requires one inspector an entire day to look at 40 cattle that have no brand on them. And the producers are struggling with this. So what we envisioned is a program that allows us to utilize an evidence of ownership technique, such as an EID tag or a biometric or something else, that has proven to these folks they know more about this animal and their ownership than what a brand inspection could ever provide. So we're looking for ways to actually streamline and simplify the inspection process for a lot of our producers that choose to not use a hot iron brand, but do believe that evidence of ownership is still a very important factor. And we do believe that EIDs or non-visual identifiers could actually help alleviate some of our problems with those producers as well. In looking at this whole process, what we have to do first is figure out what works for all of our producers in this state. We know that there's other states. There's only one other state in the US right now that's using e-inspections, and that's Washington State, and it has not worked exceptionally well. So we want to do it right. And by doing that, we felt like we needed to bring together this subcommittee, get all of their input on how they would like to utilize it, what would be benefits for them. And then I'm going to build a program based around what their needs are. All right, so that's how this whole thing started. Where we're at right now in the approach is that there is the idea that we are going to enroll these cattle to start with. So an inspection would have to be performed. There's 4 different methodologies of how an enrollment could happen. And this is all based around feedback from the first 2 meetings with our advisory group or the subcommittee group, that we would actually have an inspection enrollment where cattle that are new to the state, nobody knows anything about them, we'd go out, put our eyes on them. We would then enroll them tied into the EID number that they'd have with them. Then there would be a breeder enrollment. So they register cattle with an EID number, with a tattoo number, with a secondary visual identifier, with a certified national registry that they own that animal that they put in there. That is more evidence of ownership than we could ever do just looking at a slick-hided animal, okay? And then we might have a documented enrollment where they came through a sale barn and we had brand inspectors put eyes on them. They were literally inspected there and they were given a clearance document. And from that, we would be able to enroll them based off of that evidence of ownership at that point in time. And so we've got a 4th one, can't think of it off the top of my head, but anyways, this is what the group is doing, is helping us form like what would be the foundation for getting the cattle into the program. It's not just a willy-nilly, anybody with an animal can suddenly just put in an EID tag and then make a movement on the system. We really are very diligent about our investigators saying, I would feel comfortable that I could prove ownership with how this is transpiring. And then once those animals actually have the EID tag in, they're now included in the program. They're in our initial database. And then when they log on to our client portal and they generate their own inspection, they would include the ID numbers of the animals that were included in that transaction. Once that transaction audits against the animal database, we have very minimal data that's being stored in the animal database that would include simply their ID number, dates, and locations, and an ownership producer number, if you will. Not a name, but just a number that's tied through our inspection system. So when it goes out and does an audit, it would look to say, all right, they're saying we want to move cattle from location A to location B with producer 1, and it's still going to be producer 1 on this time and date. And it would go out, look at that number and say, yes, those cattle do reside at location A, so that matches. And the ownership is producer 1, so that matches. So flag, good, you can move these cattle, right? So it's going to always be looking at the movement records of how that individual ID number actually is transacted. If there is a break in that chain and we have a location that does not match on that trail, that animal is flagged and it now has to be inspected. We have to send somebody out because it does not meet the parameters of what we're so far into on the e-inspection system. So this is going to work really great for folks that are not changing ownership. It's also going to work well for folks that have, say, a bull sale. We have an inspector come out, he inspects all 100 head that they're selling at their bull sale, and now that producer needs to make their own inspection documents 5, 10, 30 days down the road, but we had inspected those bulls and confirmed them against their EID number, and now that producer is going to log in, be able to generate their own inspection document, have it actually watermarked with the printing that would come about, and they can print it out and give it to their producer without having the brand inspector go out one more time 30 days later to look at the same animal they looked at 30 days ago. We have so many scenarios where this is going to work exceptionally well and will save not only our brand agency a lot of field time and man time, but it's redundant in a lot of regards. And that makes the producers a little bit concerned about why they're having to pay all these redundancy fees just because of a time constraint. So from that point of us enrolling the cattle, we will then have the producer use the client portal, which is part of our NBC admin inspection program. That's the parent program that we built 4 years ago and has been working quite well. They will start off by creating their own user login. That is actually validated against driver's licenses because it's Nebraska Interactive that's actually running the program. They have that tie-in with our program at the DMV. So their producer number with their DMV driver's license guarantees that we're talking about the right person is actually logging into that account. From there, then they can start generating their own inspection. So what we do on our iPads right now in the field is going to be almost identical online about what they're going to be able to do on our system. They put in all the same information and they upload the ID list of animals that are included in this transaction. It will do an audit against the enrolled head count. It comes back green light, and then automatically they can print that inspection document and they're good to go. So it's going to save boots on the ground, essentially. It's going to save the producers a lot of time. They'll be able to do it on their schedule. And then we're going to end up hopefully being able to eliminate the surcharge, or at that point in time, potentially the mileage charge of what they would get charged. And we're really optimistic we're going to be able to make this a lower cost inspection than what a physical inspection would truly be. That's been the ongoing goal. I can't tell you what that dollar value is at this point in time, because until we've actually developed it, until I've got specs that I know how much it's going to cost to do, what it's going to cost to write a piece of data to the blockchain, what any of our ongoing costs are, I cannot give you that dollar value. Won't be able to do that for a little while. So I just beg your guys' leniency on knowing what those numbers are at this point. From there, they print it out. We've got that data residing in the animal system. So the next time they actually say it's time to move the animals back home, they generate another e-inspection. They're allowed to read those animal numbers, upload them again, create that from B to now C, everything checks out, they can run their document and everything's good. Okay, so that's essentially how the process is going to work. And it's really quite simple in that regard. As I talk about it like that, it makes a lot of sense. But there are other scenarios where it's not going to be as simple. We are focused on the low-hanging fruit, the simple transactions that are going to save the majority of people that are already utilizing EIDs, that ability to make those cost-saving moments as well as our time-saving moments. So is there any questions at this point?
Go ahead, Senator Brand.
Thank you, Chairman Howard. Thank you, Ms. Schwank, for testifying today. So going back to your example, you have 40 Holstein heifers originated in Wisconsin, get developed in Colorado, end up in a grow yard in Nebraska, and eventually go back with 40 different owners. All the owners are originally from outside the brand area in the state of Nebraska. And you said it would take all day for your inspector to inspect these. And once you see one Holstein, they all look alike, right? So I would assume they've got just an ear tag. A unique identifier is really the only information that your brand inspector can use at that point. Would that be a correct statement?
They have a visual tag as well as a secondary identifier. So when an animal is actually EID'd, we will require secondary identification on them. And even at Dwayne's operation, I believe they all have visual tags. So when they lose that EID, when we get that 1.5%, 2% that lose an EID, right now we have the ability on all of those process verification programs that are being utilizing the EIDs right now. That's how they know how to replace an EID on the appropriate individual, is that there's always a secondary means.
And that would be true unless these were slick cap. So if these were 40 slicks from 40 different owners.
No tags whatsoever.
And they have tags. They've got a visual tag. They do not have an EID tag.
That's what we use for evidence of ownership now on slick cattle.
Right. So, I mean, that would take an inspector all day to go through 40 ear tags.
And making the inspections and getting the payments and doing all that, we will have an inspector that will spend hours out at a yard. And by the time he drives out there and he drives back and he spends his time doing it, we easily have a 6-hour inspection.
But if I'm an owner from Wisconsin or, we don't have brand inspection. If I'm in eastern Nebraska, we don't have brand inspection. So what do you, I guess, have you talked to producers outside of the brand area on their input or opinions on this? I realize we're dealing inside the brand area.
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. So what the objective was is we were trying to bring together folks that are users or want to be users of this type of technology to try and figure out what our process would be, how we would build the answers to answer these type of questions, and then go to listening sessions, have different groups and areas where we could go back and then say, we now can answer your questions. And when you come up with a question that we can't answer, then we take it back to the subcommittee and we work through that scenario on how will we solve for this. John likes to always talk about the 90-10 rule. I call it the 80-20, but John's a little more stricter than I am, that we have to solve for the 90% of the scenarios first. You cannot ever solve for 100% of the scenarios because you never know what you don't know is going to get you. So as long as we can solve for 90% of the scenarios that are going to be asked of us, then we feel we're in a very comfortable place to then take it out and say, hit us with your best shot. Tell us what we haven't thought through. Tell us what we need to still solve for at that point in time. But in order for us to get there, we've got to have a starting point of what do we know? What do we know that the producers want? And that's all we're trying to do with this subcommittee, honestly.
All right. Thank you.
I'm familiar with a feedlot near Oshkosh that feeds out Holstein calves.
Yes.
And there may be others that I can only speak to this one, but it's my understanding, and I feel pretty confident in saying I can assure you, they don't load up 40 Holstein cows or heifers from different owners on a semi and then deliver them back to Wisconsin individually, stopping 40 times. I don't know if that's what you were suggesting happens, but that's not the real world for this feedlot anyway.
They do take them back to their point in Wisconsin, and then they are left at that location. What they go from there, I don't know. Actually,
But
Joe
it's
Kraske from Oshkosh Heifer Development is on our subcommittee.
But it's one load by load of Holsteins that are taken back and delivered but you're saying they're delivered back in Wisconsin, then subdivided up, all 40 of them to different owners?
I don't know if they stay at a specific dairy or what they do once they're back in Wisconsin, honestly.
Okay. Okay, any other questions? Quick question, this self-inspection, maybe it's too simple for me, or I'm too simple for it. But it kind of reminds me of a time when I was in college and I asked my college professor if I could examine my exam I just handed in, right? I mean, it seems like it would be very difficult to maintain the integrity of what you're trying to do here in tracking ownership when there's anything involved that requires self-inspection. It seems like a contradiction to me. How do you inspect something of your own?
I guess I would correlate it then to a test that you would take online. So,
I don't have a lot of trust in those either, but just so you know.
but at the end of the day, I think what's important is whatever our requirements are for a physical hot iron brand inspection, the e-inspection is going to have to hold up to the same standards as what the hot iron inspection would have to be.
Okay. Well, who's the vendor for this? I've gone through some of your materials and feedback that I've gotten. It's cattle proof, is that correct?
So
Is that-
Nebraska Interactive will be handling the e-inspection side.
Okay.
And then we were going to use a third-party vendor for our individual animal database for reasons of data security. 2 years ago, when we started this process and the investigation, the overwhelming opinion of most producers that were giving us opinions was that they didn't trust the government knowing about the individual animal numbers being in one of their databases. It was really hard for us to explain to them at that point in time. Brand already knew how many animals we were inspecting. We have a lot of that information. But what their concern was is as we build these animal IDs over time, that would be some kind of inventory. What is great about going to a third-party system is that we do not specifically have access to that data. We simply have, from our e-inspection program, it audits the data through an API that would look to just verify, does that number meet these criteria? Location, producer number, date, time. Yes. And that's all we're looking at. So for us, by having it in a third-party system, we believe we're avoiding some foiable issues, which at this point in time, I know we're looking into with the Attorney General's office, if that's really whether it's relevant or not. But that would give a layer of confidence for producers in the country that we're not utilizing all of those collected EID numbers for any kind of purpose other than is it really who it's supposed to belong to and where it's supposed to be?
Okay, I get that. I guess my question more fundamentally is, how did you choose cattle proof? What made them rise above?
So over the last 2 years that as we were going through this, we looked at several different blockchain providers.
I think you
And
said 10 in the report.
yeah, about 10 of them. And the biggest challenge we had at the time, and mind you, this is 2 years. Blockchain has really only been rising to the forefront in the last 3 to 4 years. So we were kind of on the very bleeding edge when we were looking into this originally. At that point in time, there wasn't a lot of companies out there. We had settled on one out of Wyoming and gone and worked with them a little bit. And we had some challenges
Who was
with
that?
that company. That was Beef Chain out of Laramie, Wyoming. And we had some challenges with them as we were working on a USDA grant at that point in time. And
Can I ask you, I hate to interrupt you, what were some of those challenges?
the grant basically was their programmer let us down. He did not perform the required things in time that we ended up not being able to get our application done by the deadline.
Okay.
Plain and simple. And at that point in time, there were some other red flags we were seeing from the development team as John and I went back to Laramie and met with them at the university. And so at that point in time, we kind of took a step back away from the whole process.
What was the grant you were pursuing on that?
Pardon?
What was the grant that they delayed the process for?
It was a USDA trial utilizing EIDs for different purposes, and it just kind of fit with what we were looking at that point in time. We were We were hoping we'd be able to get some development money to help build the program. At that point in time, we still had to go through, I think it was 1164, 1165. So this was quite a while ago, but we were trying to put pieces in place at that time to make sure that we would have some funding that wouldn't actually affect our appropriated budget. That's all we're doing.
When did that process start? What was the date, would you say?
Gosh, so it would have been, you remember a date on when we were even out there the first time in the rain? It was snowing, and it was, I want to say it was actually like March of 2018, 2019, March of 2019.
So substantially before, timeline-wise, substantially before you had any kind of statutory authorization to pursue.
Yeah, we were just doing some due diligence research to see if it was even something that would work.
Okay. So Cattle Proof, the ownership of Cattle Proof is Robert Jennings, is that right?
Yes,
Did he have any association with Beef Chain?
yes, he did.
Can you explain that transition from Beef Chain to Cattle Proof?
I believe what ended up happening was there was some internal issues after we had backed out of Beef Chain. And at that point in time, he had separated from Beef Chain. There was a lawsuit of some nature between them all. And really at that point, we were not involved much with them at all. And then when the dust settled, I believe Robert Jennings had won that lawsuit because he had been the owner of the company and there was some things. And from there, I had already started looking at other companies. And when we came back around and started talking to Rob later on after that, he had actually introduced us to a company called Pond Data, at that point, we were looking for a logistics company. We want to actually utilize our iPads and be able to do some scheduling and dispatching to more create efficiencies in our inspection processes. And at that point, he introduced us to them. We started talking with them, and I believe the board even approved working with Pond Data for our logistics program at that point in time. I did not know at that point that Rob and Pond Data had already formed another company called Cattle Pass, and they were working on a blockchain on the data side. At that point, then we came into having more discussions about what they had built, what they were building, and what they were planning on building. And it fit much better because they already knew what we were looking for. It fit much better than the companies that I was finding in Australia and Mexico and the US who had no background in agriculture on the blockchain side. And when we were talking about prices with those companies, they were outside of what we would even be able to pretend to spend money on. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars to try and build a system like this. So when we finally had, probably it was about a year ago that we knew that we were going to be moving forward. It looked like we were going to be moving forward. And so in January and February, we just kept going on about what they'd be able to provide for us. And the price point looked like it was going to be much more manageable and affordable. And I have a lot of confidence in who his development team is after having worked with them on some of the logistics programs that we're trying to implement.
So none of this process of using EIDs is going to have, you're not going to be gathering any information other than ownership, correct? I mean, you're not going to be gathering information about the feed that the cattle are on.
We have zero interest in any of that data.
Okay. Any other questions? Senator Brandt?
Thank you, Chairman Halloran. Quick follow-up. You said you started 2 years ago on this. In the 2 years from 2019 till now, technology-wise, has a lot changed?
On the blockchain side?
Yeah, what you're working on?
It's starting to come around. There's more companies that are dabbling, but because blockchain is such a new technology in itself, there is no company that has cornered the market on it, if you will. And even some of the blockchain providers that I've looked at even recently, they're still in idea phases of development. They don't even truly even have products marketable in some of these regards.
So because you're the IT expert for the brand committee, going forward 2 years from now and we're done with this, we won't have a technology that's obsolete. We will have an adaptive technology.
Correct.
Okay, so no matter where this blockchain or the industry is headed, we'll be in the thick of it.
I believe that that's accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Senator Gregory.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. I got a quick question or a follow-up, probably clarifying it for myself, but you talk about trust. People don't trust the government well. I probably agree with that one. But what would make them, why would they want to trust the third party? And then I'm going to have a follow-up question that you're only wanting ownership information. Is that all the third party will be able to obtain from this EID? Is the ownership or all this rest of this information that may be attached to that EID tag?
So understand that the EID tag doesn't have data attached to it unless it's collected at a location and they're willing to share it. Now, the beauty about the blockchain is really the security levels that are on a blockchain environment. And the owner of the data is really the owner of the data, which is the person that submits the data. And neither Cattle Proof nor Brand Committee has any access to data that is not specifically given by a producer. So if they choose to use a system, and I'll just use one of the PVP programs, for example, they use a database that's housed in an office, right? Or in a big building that's accessed through the cloud. But there is a database out there that all of that data resides on. And literally that company could go in and look through their entire database system at any point in time because their developers have to go in and sort through it. If that means that they have to fix something, and I was with feed yard software technology companies for 20 years. I know for a fact we would have to go in and make adjustments on the back end, as we call it. That is, to me, a huge trust issue. You cannot guarantee that the data is going to always be what the data is supposed to be. Whereas with blockchain, that's one of the big pluses, is it's immutable data. It can't just arbitrarily be changed. It has the security and it has that immutability to it. So when we talk about the data attached to the EID tag, that producer would use a PVP program and they'd submit in, say, 50 data points of information. And the folks that house that database have access to all 50 data points. Whereas in a blockchain environment, they could select to do other things with the person that is, say, Cattle Proof. So Cattle Proof offers other business, as does every other company out there. I mean, they don't have a database just for one purpose, right? They have other outstanding business applications to it. But when that data is transferred to the blockchain under the Cattle Proof umbrella, that data is not being used for anything else unless the producer specifically says, I want you to take those 10 pieces and send them here, and those 3 pieces and allow them to go here, and those 4 pieces and allow Department of Agriculture for animal disease traceability to utilize those. That owner of that data has absolute control over who accesses what data fields are included. Do we need any more than that? No, absolutely not. We need our 5 pieces and that's it. If they elect to do other services with a company, that's not anything for us to be involved with. That is not what I care about. I care about the 5 pieces we need to be able to audit when our e-inspections come in, and that's it.
Would you explain to me again, then, you as a government agency won't know what the third party has? Did I hear that right?
Correct.
Well, why do you have the third party? Who's watching the third party?
The third party
mean-
who's watching it, what do you mean?
Well, if the producer doesn't trust the government and you don't even know what information the third party, are you not hiring the third party, or the third party working in conjunction with you, the brand inspection committee?
Right now, what we believe we're doing is hiring the third party. So until we have other information from the Attorney General that tells us they're not even necessary, that's what our vision of the program is, to assure that the producers that are entering the information is that a government entity cannot go out and just do an inventory look and see how many EIDs does that producer have. That was the entire purpose, was for us to gain more trust from the producers that we could not go back in and use it for other purposes.
But I'm still having a hard time here with, if all you want to know is ownership, what trust, I mean, what could you do that they won't trust you to, okay, I'm going to move my cattle from point A to point B. I'm not selling them, I'm just moving them. And that's why I'm hearing this be a great system for that. But when you go to sell cattle and now you're coming up with cattle that are unbranded and no tag on them, and now I got to prove that those are my cattle. And that's in the selling process. That's not from moving them from my pasture over to my winter grazing or what, or from pasture back. I'm just having a hard time with what in all you want is ownership. What is not to trust there from the government? How did we lose such trust or brand inspection committee lose such trust that somebody's not even going to trust that you can identify from moving my own cattle from point A to point B. That's all you really want to know, right?
Mhm.
You don't want to know anything else. So why does all this other have to even get involved into to even go into this cattle proof or whatever and whoever, why do you got to get involved with those?
Because what we have learned over time is that there is an inherent lack of trust in government, period. We even have producers that won't even give us their checking account information to pay for their inspections. Okay. There is a element of producers out there.
That's a whole nother issue.
Right. But there's a whole group of producers out there that really do not want to see us having any specific detailed information on their operations. I wished it wasn't so, Senator. I truly wished it wasn't so. I could make this system so much quicker and easier if we weren't trying to satisfy the concerns of all of our producers. And I would truly ask for you to talk with some of those producers on our social media accounts that are lambasting us for trying to implement a program like this, because where it comes back to on most of their concerns is trust of who's going to have access to their data.
And again, I'm going to go back to the only thing the brand inspection area or committee has is how many cattle you have and you own them. I think to me, that's very simple without going in and hiring all these other entities. And now we're getting into, well, how much data is on there? And we don't care how much data is on there because that goes off over here. But it's a cattle proof. Is that somebody you hired, you vetted and you hired?
It's someone that I have selected, yes.
So
Much
Well,
like the other software
So if they
providers. in our
abuse
company.
something on information, is the government liable for that?
I don't know how the liability falls, Governor, Senator. I've just been hired to do a job.
Yeah, I got you. Well, I'm just asking a question. Yeah. If you don't know, that's an answer.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know.
Thank you.
It's important to know where the liability falls. So.
We know that we will have contracts with all of these companies and that security and privacy is utmost forefront in those contracts. Even with Nebraska Interactive that we do all of our inspection information with, it's the same type of contracts. We have the same type of contracts with our timekeeping system that we had built. And the same things would happen with our logistics company when we build software with them. So it's the same thing across the board.
Okay. A quick question. Do you have any personal experience with using cattle proof, such as you have a partnership relationship with Jacqueline
Yep.
Wilson?
So during this last time frame, as we were looking for proof of concept and whether it worked, I have a side company with Jacqueline Wilson of Flying Diamond Beef that we do a direct-to-consumer meat business. And we slaughter Jacqueline's cattle. We buy from Wilson Ranch and we slaughter, I think we did 65 head last year. And in that time, we were looking for ways to differentiate ourselves. And one of the things that we truly believe in as a Flying Diamond Beef, and this is completely separate from my job as brand, but is I believe that when consumers want to know where their beef came from, there should be a way to prove it. And with our blockchain technology, we believe that we can take an EID number, or in this case, we use biometrics. So we don't even rely on a tag. We use biometrics. We have a visual face scan done and the body scan done of the animal. And we then associate an ID number with it, just as it's an ID number saying this image belongs to this cow. And then we can sell that animal with all of this information. So a consumer who really wants to know that their animal is bought and grown and raised and everything that was done to it, they would be able to access it. So I volunteered with Rob as they were trying to find people to do some proof of concepts. I said, look, talk to Jacqueline. I know that that's something that she's been interested in technology wise. She does a lot of genomic testing and a lot of that. Said maybe she'd be interested in helping. And so of course, Jacqueline said, yeah, let's try this. So she was working with a company out of Australia to do some embed-a-vet tags that work with health sensors. And then she was working with, because that would do a proof of life example. And then she was working with the cattle proof to actually store and record the information on the blockchain. And then Plain Sight, I think, is the biometrics company that they came out and did all the visual scans and everything else of the animals and tied it all together. So from that side, we started using cattle proof because that was the only blockchain individual animal provider at the time that's even out there. So that's the relationship on a personal level. And that started, we trialed that in June. So that's all that is. It's not anything that I'm pushing for Rob or cattle proof or anything. It's just a matter of they were the only ones available to actually try and do something new and different to really trace our product.
Yes.
So that'll just spurs another question for me then. Are we not getting the brand inspection committee, are we not getting out of our lane when we start going into where this cow come from or this critter come from and what its background is and all this? All we want to know is
Brand
ownership.
isn't doing that though, sir.
What
That's
is the
not what
what is
brands
the
do.
brand committee again responsibility? Main responsibility is
To
ownership.
verify ownership, that we are looking at evidence of ownership when we do our transactions. And that's the only data pieces that was actually being put into the system was here's the ID number, here's the location it came from, here's the producer number it was tied to at this date and time. And then on the second transaction, here's the location, here is the producer number that it's tied to at this date and time. Do those correlate? Yes. Move on.
Okay, but I go back then to are you a brand committee member?
Brand committee employee.
Employee, okay,
Yes.
employee.
Yes.
So I go back to then you hired this cattle proof and now they got information. You don't even know how much information they really have. Where does it, once again, I'm reiterating, where does the liability fall on the government then? Because an employee hired that company and now they went off and did something probably they shouldn't have did.
I didn't hire them, sir. We don't even have a
Okay.
signed contract with them yet.
What'd you do? Just recommend them for?
Yes, I have vetted 10 different companies. I offer my professional opinion on who best fits the situation and the scenario and the budget constraints that we're looking for.
So indirectly, then the producers still trust in the government. They just don't know.
Trusting the government.
Because you, as a government employee, hired that third party,
But I don't have access to their data.
right? But whether you have that or not, you still are confident and you hired
The right company?
the right company.
Yes.
And so I got to trust that you're making the right decision, right? So we're right back to trust to the government employee.
Well, they trusted our decision on building our e-inspection, our electronic inspection program with Nebraska Interactive.
Yeah, well, I guess there's got to be some trust there, right?
I would hope that there'd be some
Yeah.
trust there. I mean, we're out to do the right thing for the producers at
Sure.
the end of the day.
We all know that, yeah. Thank you.
So quick question, well, maybe two here, but the quick question, the subcommittee got to look at each one of these 10 or so companies in detail?
No,
No. Who, okay, so they only got to look at what was narrowed down to one?
we as a group had actually agreed on cattle proof months ago. So it was one of those things that they've been informed, and along the way, as we were going through these different companies, John especially, everyone was aware of who I was looking at and what was going on.
But my question is, the subcommittee they were afforded a detailed look at 10 companies or so, right?
No, the subcommittee has only been in existence for 30 days, essentially. We've been doing this back end legwork for the last year and a half, at least, more like 2, because if you add in all the cattle, the
Okay,
beef chain
so
time, it's been 2.5.
I understand. So they've had no exposure to the other 9 potential vendors.
No,
What did Washington State do wrong? You had mentioned that Washington State wasn't very successful in what they were doing with e-inspect.
This is where I have to take a moment and not say the wrong thing, since Washington State could be watching.
Hello, Washington State.
Right. One of the challenges Washington State has faced, and we found this out while we were at the International Livestock Identification Symposium in July with the investigators and the chief investigator and myself, is that the surrounding states have no trust in the inspections that are coming out of their e-inspection program in Washington. So Oregon and Idaho do not recognize their e-inspections. But the reason why is because they allow people to become brand inspectors online, and they don't have an enrollment process that guarantees the cattle that are being inspected are really the cattle. So it was a program that was mandated by the Washington Legislature without the brand inspection agency really having had any time to do background or checks or figure out what their processes were going to be. They were told they had to do it, and then they had 6 months to figure out how to do it. I think we're coming about it from a completely different direction, and that's what's going to make our program much more successful.
Okay. Any other questions? Senator Kavanaugh, you own 60 head of cattle, it was mentioned earlier.
I don't like to talk about it.
All right, well, thank you very much. John?
Mr. Chairman, I guess at this point in time, if there's any other questions for myself or any of the committee members, that's where we're at. Is there anything else?
Quick question about Cattle Pass. Isn't there a vendor called Cattle Pass?
Cattle Proof?
No, Cattle Pass.
That was the original name, and I guess they have changed it to Cattle Proof now.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
See, this is like watching a crime scene, trying to trace all the players involved in I shouldn't have mentioned crime scene. But because we got Beef Chain, we got Cattle Proof, where does Cattle Pass fit into that, or does it?
To my understanding, that Cattle Pass is and was the same entity, same business as Cattle Proof. They changed the name for
I see.
name issues or
Trademark
patent,
issues.
trademarking things. Yep. Let me just clear. Let's make the record straight on Cattle Proof. There's been no contract taken to the committee. There will be a contract on behalf of Cattle Proof that will go into exact detail of what services they will provide, what the liabilities are that they will cover, what the cost of that will be. And that will be something that will be brought to me. And then after I have the opportunity to look at it, be comfortable with it, then at that point in time, if I am, then I will take that to the committee. The committee will be the end all be all on that. So Cattle Proof has not been contractually obligated to the committee. We are not paying them for any services. It's just strictly vetting and doing research on what or who could possibly provide the service that we need. And that's truly what we're looking for, is a service provider. So I just want to clear the record or make the record straight. They're not contractually obligated at this point in time. That will be a committee decision.
Question, and I probably, I assume then Dana is the subject matter expert on hiring these, but do you even know who the other 9 people were, or the other 9 companies were? Or I know you said the subcommittees didn't hear it of the other 9. Have you yourself?
I would have been briefly briefed for on a few of them. To say all 9, no. But there's
Maybe the last 3.
Yeah. And Senator, I couldn't even tell you who those are at this point in time. That's been multiple years back. That's so far removed from my thought process on a daily basis. But it'd be no different than our investigators going out and getting bids and doing research on printer stands for their investigative trucks.
Right.
You know, I have people that I have complete faith and trust in, and they go out and do their due diligence. They bring it back to me. We look at things, we talk as a group, and then if it's something that we feel that we need to, we pass it on to the committee.
Okay.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
And
I'm good.
Good. So typically when there's bids on anything or a bid, there's usually multiple bids just to keep it
in certain situations, yes,
competitive,
and
right?
on certain things, but not all things
Why
require
not
that.
here though? Why not for this process?
Sometimes there's just not enough vendors that carry that same service. So,
So Beef Chain doesn't have the capability and the wherewithal to do blockchain if that's what's necessary?
oh, I think they do, but that would be an assumption. To be honest, I haven't kept track of beef chain. That's not what I do on a daily basis. So I can't answer that today. You know, I will take any recommendations that this committee has back to our staff and to the committee. The whole thought process behind going to a third party was that we were given information that was very important. And we have producers that tell us that. We were told that would not be able to be accomplished unless a third party held that database. That is completely and solely our whole motivation. Now, if we find out from the AG's office, which I have that in the works, that is not required or that will not work, we'll revisit that whole situation. Now, the solution is, say cattle proof is not the solution. We don't have to have a third party. That's still a service and a cost that's going to have to be incurred by somebody. So is this committee, are our producers, is the brand committee more comfortable with the Nebraska Brand Committee providing that database and that services? If that is the comfort level, so be it. Now, what's the cost structure of that? And who can service that? So
I don't think the committee has any concern about hiring an outside vendor, or if you want to put in your own bid to see if you can do it competitively with these vendors that already exist. But my recommendation is that you look at 3 bids. There's
Sure.
got to be 3 companies out there that can do something very similar to what you're looking at, and put it out to 3 bids. Because a competitive process, I think the producers would appreciate this because they're ultimately going to be paying for it,
Mhm.
right? I think it's necessary to have more than one vendor that you're looking at. Period. That's it. You need to have some competition for this bid.
absolutely, yes, sir. We will explore that.
Senator Brown.
Thank you, Chairman Howard. Thank you, John. You're very knowledgeable on this subject. For the people that are listening, let's give them a little scope. Do you know how many total head of cattle are under brand inspection in the brand inspection area in Nebraska?
Total number of head? I would be just guessing if I gave you a number.
Approximate.
I'd say it's probably 3 to 4 million head.
3 to 4 million head. And it sounds like the 3 main ways of identification would be hot brand, freeze brand, and EID, and slick. So today we're examining electronic inspection. So out of those millions of head today, how many are under EID?
About 2 million.
2 million.
I'd say roughly plus or minus 2 million head are utilizing an EID at this point in time. In the whole state.
Oh, in the whole state.
Yeah.
So that would be in my area, that is the
Correct.
non-brand area.
Yeah.
All right.
But once those cattle come in, our packing industry is in the inspection area from the most part. So,
All right. Thank you.
Senator, if I could make an analogy, and this is not good, and this is one of my faults. You go to Walmart and you had the typical, you go check out. Back in the old days where you had little stickers on everything and the cash register person would type it all in, whatever. Then we went to a barcode where now you don't have to type it all in. It's much faster. You scan the barcode and you stand in line. They put everything in your bag, so on and so on. Now you go to Walmart and you can do a self-checkout. I don't know if the analogy is correct or not, but that's all we're trying to potentially provide as a service is the self-checkout. But when you go to Walmart, there's things in place to protect Walmart from theft. But at the end of the day, if you want to steal from Walmart or be a bad agent, you can steal going through self-checkout or the other way. You can put something in your code or however you want to do that. But you're going to try to put all the practices in place to eliminate that. That's all we're trying to do, is have a form of self-checkout. And it's only going to be for certain situations. At Walmart, it's 20 items or less. We're going to have parameters to fit that e-inspection. And we're going to try to have safeguard and audit things in place to mitigate any liability or risk to our producers. We do not want to jeopardize the Nebraska Brand Act. On my watch, that's the worst thing I can do as executive director, is to mitigate, devaluate the Nebraska Brand Act. We do not want to do that. I'm the fourth generation. My boys are the fifth generation. We got cattle. They're valuable assets. That's not where my legacy wants to go. Do I have all the answers today? No. Is that why we have a subcommittee of people that have a broader sense of experiences than I do? Yes. At the end of the day, the Nebraska Brand Committee has learned from past mistakes. We work for the producers. They're our customers. They sign our paychecks. Therefore, we take their input and their direction. That's who we work for.
Thank you, John. It wasn't fair for me to ask you or Ms. Schwank the names of those 10 vendors, but would you, when you return back to your office, send me a list of those 10 vendors that you previously looked at?
Yes, sir.
Any further questions? Okay. Well, I guess that concludes this public briefing. I emphasize the public briefing again. So thank you all for attending. I appreciate your input and feedback. So we'll proceed.
Back to your article, I think that person might saw you.
I don't know.